Everyone, thank you so much for coming to our show. We have a special guest today. We have the world famous Dr. Mordechai Kedar, the world renowned expert on the Middle East, on Arab culture, Arab mentality, Arab interests, and also what is the future of the Arab state. I had the fortune of interviewing Dr. Kedar in Jerusalem several years ago, and that interview was seen around the world, and many people were very enlightened by the interview. We're now going to take the interview to new levels because of the situations happening now in the Middle East, in Israel, and around the world. So thank you so much for coming to our show, Dr. Kedar.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Rabbi Schwartz.
Thank you. Let me ask you a question. Before we get into the issue of what happened the last 2 weeks, what is the situation now, do you think, within Israel itself, since so-called the new situation whereby an Arab party has joined the coalition, which, by the way, it's not the first time in Israeli history. People think it is, but it's not. Has that changed the Arab mentality in Israel, or is basically it's still the same? It was too young, too short, too soon to tell.
First of all, it is too soon to tell because this is the first time which we see such a phenomenon where hundreds, if not thousands, of Arab young males bursting to the streets to burn cars which belong to Jews, to burst into apartments, and actually to kill a few Jews. We have never witnessed such a phenomenon so far. Or maybe you can talk about the riots of 1920, 21, 29, those. But since Israel was established, we didn't see this kind of riots, anti-Jewish as they were, since the state was established. Maybe you can point to something which was at the end of September of 2000, when the second Intifada erupted. But that wave of violence was, crashed by the fact that 13 Arabs were killed by the police. Since then, the police was, I would say, castrated. And as a result, what you see today, that the police lost its deterrence. And when people are more than sure that nothing will happen to them, only because they come to burn cars, today a policeman is more afraid of the prosecution and the judges and the department which investigates policemen. They are more afraid from those than from anyone who, let's say, burn a police car. So let the police car burn, as long as the policeman is not being brought to court because he shot at some thug, only because he was burning a police car. And this is what I mean by the castration of the police. And this actually happened. What happened during the last 20 years, since the eruption of the Second Intifada and the OR committee, which actually showed the way how to put handcuffs on the hands of the policemen rather than putting handcuffs on the hands of the criminals or the jihadists. And here we have to understand the background of the culture of the Middle East, because this is part of this. What we saw, the violence in the mixed cities here in Israel, I mean Lod, Haifa, Akko, Jaffa, means Yafo. We definitely saw it in Jerusalem, the riots in Jerusalem. In addition to the missiles which were launched towards Israel from Gaza. And the immediate question is there a connection between all these events, apart from the fact that they were at the same time? Well, depends on what you are. If you are a liberal who thinks in an analytic way, you see there is no connection. These are Israeli citizens who have all kinds of grievances and they have all kinds of complaints against the country. This is what happened in Lod, in Yafo, in Haifa. The problem in Jerusalem is connected to the Sheikh Jarrah houses. And in Gaza, it's a well-known problem from long ago. So there's three different ideas or three different arenas with no connection. This is what usually people tend to say, and to look at each issue as separate. However, this is as far as could be from the way which people in here in the Middle East, especially the Arab sector in Israel and the Palestinians in Jerusalem, or the people in Gaza, they think in a different way. For them, it is a one holistic phenomenon, and it has a name: jihad. Jihad. And jihad, as you might know, has or can have many facets or many manifestations. First of all, Rabbi Schwartz, we have to understand that the religion, means the Islamic religion here, underlies everything. It is the basis of the thinking in this region. Liberal people tend to ignore it or to push it aside because they don't have the ability to understand that there are other people who are less liberal than they are, and there are other people actually think from the religious point of view. The struggle against Israel is named jihad, and jihad is well rooted in the Islamic tradition, Islamic thought, and actually jihad is an effort. The translation is an effort which the mujahid, means the fighter of jihad or the one who is involved in the jihad, spends. And let me show you, let me talk about the kinds of jihad. According to the Islamic thought and Islamic jurists of since Islam came to the world 14 centuries ago. First of all, there is the military jihad, or the fight jihad, or the war jihad, which could be with a sword, it could be with a gun, could be with a cannon, could be with an airplane, it could be with a missile, like Hamas, or it could be with an explosive belt. These are the kind of the fight jihad. But there are other kinds of jihad as well. First of all, the economic jihad. If you support the mujahid, if you give him a food, if you give him a bed to rest, if you give him your horse in order to arrive the jihad more faster and in a better shape, you have like either third or half of his reward as a mujahid. So economic support of the jihad is part of jihad, means it's the economic jihad. It could be a political jihad. If you establish parties or organizations which are calling for jihad, encouraging for jihad, collecting money for jihad, all these organizations are called political jihad. You can have a media jihad, because if you establish media outlets like Al Jazeera from Qatar, or Al Manar of Hezbollah, or the Al Aqsa channel of Hamas, or social media which support the jihad, this is a media jihad. This is also a part of the jihad. It could be a social jihad. It's called, actually there's another name, da'wah, but it's more or less the same thing. It's, to open or establish all kinds of organizations in order to support needy people, to cure the ill, and all these things, in order to encourage people to join the jihad, because the mujahid took care of their unemployment or their health issues. So this is also part of da'wah. There is an educational jihad, means to open schools, kindergartens, whatever, in order to instill the idea of jihad into the souls of the students, of the even little students, even kindergarten. And one of the Islamic movement here in Israel actually said that their Islamic kindergartens are part of the educational jihad. He talked about this. Then you have an academic jihad. What happens in campuses in the United States, for example? First of all, you see all kinds of Islamic money funneled into research organizations in universities in order to produce papers which will whitewash the problems of Islam or the problems which Islam causes. You have Muslim Students Association in the United States, an organization which is funded by the Muslim Brotherhood, by CARE, or by organizations which are connected to the Muslim Brotherhood in the United States. You have periodicals like Islamophobia Studies Journal, also in order to instill the idea that talking against Islam means Islamophobia. Even if you talk about Islamic terrorism, no, it is forbidden because it's Islamophobia. Okay, so this is another, it's academic jihad. Okay, there is a migration jihad. What they have to Europe, what they do to the United States. Okay, it's also part of the jihad because it's supposed to broaden the lens of Islam and to make Islam prevail over other religions. You can talk about the settlement jihad, means to buy properties in Europe, in the United States. And this is also part of the settlement jihad. You can add to this prayers in the street. In France, we saw it on a large scale because they come and prayer in the street actually means that here we are here to stay and the public sphere belongs to us. And this is a manifestation of presence, which is here forever. And if you French want to run away, it's okay, the door is open. Leave us alone here in your country. This is also kind of jihad in order to instill fear in the hearts of the hosting society so people run away. And this is actually what happens in France. This is also part of the jihad because at the end of the day, it will broaden the lens which Islam rules on. And this is actually the idea behind the jihad. You can talk about the street jihad, but you see the riots here, or you see this in London, you see it in Paris, how they burst to the streets to destroy, to burn, they you might remember what happened in 2005, November, when thousands of cars were burnt in Paris in some nights, one after the other. And you are not allowed to do anything against them because they are not killing anybody. So you are not allowed to hurt them. Okay. There is another kind of jihad of conversion to Islam. Usually in campuses, but not only. They convince kids, youngsters, boys, girls, to convert to Islam. And, converting to Islam is very easy. You just stand in front of the crowd and you say, La ilaha illallah, Muhammad Rasulullah, no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his messenger, and you are a Muslim, full-fledged Muslim. And they encourage to do it in order to broaden the population of Islam. The main or the biggest construction company in Lebanon, under Hezbollah, of course, is called the Construction Jihad. Means constructing buildings, bridges, whatever. Also part of the jihad, because you establish and you strengthen the economy and the being of the Islamic country. So it's also Hassan Nasrallah was talking about the industrial jihad, means to promote the industry of Lebanon against the industry of Israel and so forth. So this is also part of jihad. However, in Lebanon, they have a very unique jihad, which is the drug jihad. Means they buy drugs like marijuana and whatever, and they ship it to Europe, to America, to wherever they can, in order to weaken the infidel societies by making them addicted to drugs. This is also part of the jihad because it weakens the enemy of Islam, which is the Christendom. Okay? They have the judicial jihad, means suing Israel or other countries in international tribunals like the ICC in Hague or other places, which allow this. So, in order to drag Israel or other countries to these courts, this is also part of the jihad because it's part of the fight against Israel or against others. There is another kind of jihad here in Israel, especially. This is, I would say, the theft jihad or the criminal jihad. Means they burst into houses, they steal, they burn, they burn groves here in Israel. Whenever we have a very hot day, especially in the summer, there are many fires in groves every single year, and this is definitely this arson. These are cases of arson, and this is also a part of fighting the fire jihad, which those jihadists are waging
A question
against.
to ask you. Now, in terms of the jihad and so forth, I understand that what you're saying that Islam is basically a conversion religion that seeks out to convert, seeks out to conquer, and jihad has many different forms and different manners. But the question is, how could it be that in 73 years, basically, of living in Israel, Israeli society, Israeli democracy, Israeli Western values, that even Israeli Arabs have been caught by the jihad? Is the majority Israeli Arabs, minority Israeli Arabs, is the Israeli youth? I remember once, several years ago, I was talking to an Arab in Zichron that he told me in the mosque now there is a prophecy, quote unquote, that's going around that within the next 6 to 7 years, Israel will fall, and that the youth is waiting for this. Now,
Yeah.
how is it possible that with all this democracy and all the Western values, Israeli Arabs are fell into this trap?
Well, first of all, we have to say that not all of them. There are many, even the Muslims. I would even say that the majority want to live in Israel and accept Israel as a Jewish state. They might not love it, but all the other options around Israel are much worse. So, living in Israel, they feel much more well off. So this is the majority, those who think. What you saw during May is that youngsters ran to the streets to do all this jihad, all these kinds of jihad, especially the street jihad. And the fire, by the way, today, yesterday, it was announced that a friend of mine, Abi Har-Even, who was the head of the Israel Space Authority.
Yes.
He was a member of Besa Center, where I am a member at Bar Ilan. He was injured heavily. He was burned in the riots in Akko. He stayed there in a hotel, and the hotel was a fire was set in the hotel, and he was heavily burned, and he struggled for 2 weeks, and he passed away yesterday.
He was 85 years old.
Yeah. So this is what I talk about, arson jihad. Okay, so I'm not saying that all the Muslims in Israel are there, and don't forget that the Islamic sector in Israel are 17% of the population of Israel, like 1 of 6. I'm not saying that all of them are jihadists, not at all. What you saw in the streets are mainly males. Maybe in one, two less cases, you saw girls. It's mainly men. This is one thing. Second thing, I believe that many of them are unemployed, maybe because of the coronavirus. They were fired, like many other Israelis, because businesses collapsed. All kinds of businesses, and they have not yet found any job. So they are sitting around doing nothing, full of grievances against the country, against whoever they are against. And when they see that there is a propaganda against Israel because of what happens in Jerusalem, and Hamas are shooting missiles, so say, Yalla, let's join this jihad. And then this is actually it happened. And don't forget that the police is viewed as very weak. I believe also that the political situation, when you have no government for who knows, for 2 years, you have this crisis in the political arena. They understand that Israel is weak, and the police always tries to appease the jihadists in Jerusalem or in Temple Mount, and of course Hamas with their propaganda channel Al Quds or Al Aqsa channel. Definitely, they incited people. But here I must say that there is another very important media outlet, which actually I think was behind the whole thing, was Al Jazeera. Al Jazeera, which works in Israel miraculously. I don't understand how this country allows this media jihad being waged against Israel from within. Years ago, Israel should have told Al Jazeera, you get out. You can do whatever you do against us from abroad. We don't need you here. And there are at least two media channels which are not allowed to work in Israel. One is Al Manar, which serves Hezbollah, and the other one is Al Alam, which is the Arabic-speaking media TV channel, which serves the Ayatollahs in Iran. You are not allowed to go around with a microphone with a sign of Al Manar or Al Alam in Israel. And if you do, you go to jail because they have no permission to work in Israel because Israel did not give them the permit. However, Israel should treat Al Jazeera in the same way because Al Jazeera is a vile enemy of Israel, incites against Israel in every given moment, lies about Israel. And why should Israel give Al Jazeera the ability to work from within? Let them do it from Amman, from Qatar, the country which sponsors Al Jazeera. Let them do it from there. Why do they need here to be here?
So when do you think
So
the
the jihad
liberal?
against us would be easier for them?
So when do you think the liberal media or the liberals will wake up to the reality and understand that this is a religious war? It's not because of rights. It's not because they want to have a two-state solution, but basically it's either us or them. Do you think one day these people wake up to that? Those are liberal, or they will just always be blind to it?
Look, if you hear the Israeli media, since the riots or the jihad actually was hushed down by the police and by the General Security Service, I mean the Shabak here in Israel, the media, the Israeli Hebrew-speaking media, got back to its normal life. It was, it's a property crimes. They don't. People got killed, guys. No, it's by chance here, by chance. This is the aura of the atmosphere in the Israeli media because the Israeli media is deep in the left, which doesn't let facts disrupt their theories.
And these facts that you're mentioning so forth, I mean, it's been going on for decades. But because, so what does it need to be done in order that for the the college students, so the people who have been leftist, who are still leftist. I myself, I come from a left tradition. I
I
do.
also I was an activist in one of the peace organizations during the 90s, but
Yes,
I left it when I saw that it goes nowhere.
exactly
Uh,
with me too as well. I also was woke up to that reality, and I saw basically that's an ongoing war. No matter what we do, they won't accept us no matter what.
yeah.
And so that being the case, then how then? That's one of the questions I want to ask you. Is when we have this quote unquote kumbaya, this is meant fantasy of people staying together, having an Israeli society that's going to accommodate everybody, which it already does already. How dangerous is it now to have what the Bennett and the Pede having having Mansour Abbas in the government?
First of all, I will not be surprised if this government will not even be sworn in, because there are so many differences between the components of this government, and I don't see how they bridge over the differences between them. Look, if we have some problem with Gaza, for example, and they shoot missiles against us, the Ram, which belongs to the Muslim Brotherhood, just like Hamas, would not like even Israel even to throw a rock to Gaza. While the right wing, means Bennett, Saar, would definitely try to reconstruct the deterrence by acting, and maybe acting in a way which will convince the Hamas that messing with us is uh, does worth it. So how can you bridge between the Israeli willing to to teach Hamas the lesson on one side, and the Ram party, which doesn't want Israel to do anything against it? So here we are, the first time which we have something from Gaza, the government will fall apart because they cannot support such a thing. So this government looks so fragile that first of all, there are all kinds of rumors or signs that some Knesset members, around four, who are supposed to be part of the coalition, which the change coalition, four of them will not support it. And if they drop from the coalition, they don't have 61 and they don't have a coalition. And we go to elections. This is so it will not be sworn in. And if it does, if it is sworn in, it will fall apart in like a week, 2, 3. Already I heard that the Labour Party, Michaeli, Merav Michaeli demands that Israel reduces dramatically the budget for paving roads in Judea and Samaria, in the budget.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, if Bennett doesn't agree, what will happen? Will she stay in the government and vote for the budget? And without budget, there is no government. Will Saar refrain from supporting this kind of reduction of budgets to Judea and Samaria? So there are so many issues which there is no even one common denominator which can combine the components of this government to work together about. So this is why I anticipate that this government, first of all, will not be sworn in, and if it is, it will fall apart within weeks maximum. So this is why I'm not so worried about this.
Mm-hmm.
However, damages can be done very quickly. Let's say that some, let's say, announcement comes there that Israel supports the establishing of a Palestinian state. Okay, this is something which it will be very hard to change later.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to be very careful and we have to be very alert about what happens with this government. And look, the Likud is not going to give easy time to the government from the opposition. The Likud will do whatever it can in order to embarrass the government and
Sure.
in order to push it to a point where the right and the Arabs, at least, cannot agree on anything. Like all kinds of law initiatives which Bennett or Saar were behind formally and did not come to fruition to become a law. Now the Likud can take them out from the archive and to put them back on the desk of the Knesset in order to be a law, something which Bennett once wanted to have. But now, with a heavy burden of carrying a government with the left and with the Arabs, he cannot vote for these law proposals. So he will have to betray himself to vote
His
against
base.
something which he supported formally. So this is what the Likud is waiting to do to the government. So this is what I think. However, don't forget, Rabbi Schwartz, that we still have, as we speak now, Tuesday night, we still have, I think, until Sunday or Monday, until the government will be sworn in or supposed to be sworn in. And this is 4 days are forever in the Israeli politics because something can happen, especially if Netanyahu agrees to leave office and to enable another Knesset member from the Likud, like Israel Katz or Nir Barkat or Dichter, doesn't matter. Another one to try to shape a government. I think that if this happens, means Netanyahu is not the prime minister, Bennett, Saar, and probably Lieberman as well will walk in. Will leave.
Question to ask you, besides going back to Bibi for 1 second. If, for example, there was no Arab problem, then the people, the Arabs accepted us and so forth. Would people still see Zionism, unfortunately, as they say, it's racism? Will they understand that Zionism is the national liberation movement of the Jewish people? Or this we condemn because we are Jewish, no matter what, people will never try to accept us or realize that we also deserve to have our own state?
Look, Jews usually tend to believe that Israel should be Jewish. What Israel should do with the Arab sector, and especially the status of the nation law, basic law of the nation, this is another question. Arabs usually do not agree, especially not milechatchila, to begin with, that the state, the Jewish state, has a right to exist, because in their narrative, Israel has no right to exist because Jews do not belong here. Jews belong to everywhere in the world, as they were for 2,000 years at least. And Judaism, anyway, is null and void because Islam came to the world to replace both Judaism and Christianity. So why do you need a Jewish state if Judaism is invalid? It doesn't exist anymore, replaced. And the land belongs to Islamic world because this is a holy land for Islam because it once was under Islamic rule. And according to the Islamic Sharia, there is no way to take a land out of the Islamic rule. A land has only one-way ticket.
So
So
according to that,
this is why they speak also about Spain.
yes, I'm saying yes,
As a
right.
country which should return to Islam. And the same thing about the island of Sicily, the southern part of Italy, should return to be Islamic, all the way up to Vienna, where they were defeated in September 11, 1683. They had all the space. between southern Greece, the Balkans,
Hmm.
all the way up to Austria of today or Vienna. Okay, so all these countries belong to them according to the Sharia, and this country as well, the land of Israel. Only because
Yeah.
there was here sometime in history an Islamic rule.
I remember
So
once you told me in Jerusalem when I interviewed you that basically Islam is seventh century Bedouin thinking. In other words, a Bedouin comes to a territory at nighttime. By the morning, he says it's been mine for 1,000 years already,
at least,
at least. So that being the case, then is it ever possible that one day, maybe not now, there's been maybe modern inroads with maybe in the early 20th century, but we see that 21st century things have become more radical. That that ever possible that maybe this Muslim world can change one day, that they can have
well,
this.
it depends. It depends on the others, Jews, Christians, and all the others, because according to the jihad doctrine, the nation, the Islamic nation, should not commit a suicide, mass suicide. One fighter here, one fighter there, it's okay. But the nation should survive in any case. Now, if they have, in the Islamic world, has a very powerful enemy, and he actually is a very credible threat, and he is invincible. So, according to the Islamic Sharia, which is based on the precedents of the Prophet Muhammad, the Islamic State can give temporary peace to the infidel. Temporary peace. And this is actually the game here. If Israel will be invincible, powerful, threatening, credible threat forever, Israel will enjoy a temporary peace forever.
How's it possible? I understand. And how's it possible that, for example, there's 150,000 missiles in the north, in the south of Lebanon, north of Israel. There's missiles in the south not Hezbollah, Hamas. There's also a threat from the later on from Fatah. We don't know what's going to happen yet with them. How is the military possible to basically to fight all these fronts? The Iron Dome can only defend so much, unless we go to an all-out war where we're going to use tremendous weapons.
Well, here comes the problem which the Supreme Court caused. The Supreme Court invented the rule of proportionality. Means if they killed one of us, you're not allowed to kill more than one of them. You cannot kill 20. Okay? This is the idea behind this bizarre rule of proportionality. Okay? Why? Because proportionality actually acts against deterrence. Because what is deterrence? Deterrence means that if they shoot one shot towards us, they're going to have a waterfall of bombs on them. This is when or how deterrence is created, not by a stone versus to stone or a shot versus shot. Deterrence is a product of a situation which they know that even one small, let's say, missile will be retaliated by thousands of Israeli missiles. Unproportionate,
Mm-hmm.
definitely,
Mm-hmm.
definitely. But this is what creates deterrence. And here comes the unfortunate issue is that the Supreme Court is the Israeli, let's say, ruling court, which decided that Israel should be proportional.
The same
Means,
token, the same token
mean,
example, you have a non-Jewish governments. Example in World War II. World War II, the Americans tried to bomb precise bombings. They realized they couldn't do it, So then they did the covert bombings. They killed 100,000 civilians in one night against the Japanese. And when
Yeah.
when the British were fighting against the Germans, in Dresden they killed 30,000 about. And the Americans, when the Americans were attacked by 9/11, what did they do? They went into Afghanistan. They wiped out Iraq. But when a Jewish state does something, all of a sudden we know we can't do it because we are the minority of the world. So how then? Let's assume Israel were to do that, and war becomes proportional. How could we? What could we do in the media? What could we prevent riots in the streets around the world of anti-Semitism and so forth? Because what you're saying over here is that yes, we have to take tremendous force, and it will work. The Arabs will learn that. The same token, the repercussions politically, media, and so forth, socially, culturally, celebrities, so anti-Semitism in the streets. What do we do about that?
Look, the demonstrations against Israel in London, or we saw in the United States, are definitely part of the jihad. This is the street jihad against Israel. Demonstrations is a part of the jihad because those demonstrations are meant to create public opinion against Israel, which will be translated to political pressure on Israel by the Democratic Party, which is now in power. So this is I would say, the chart or the flow from media, the street, political arena, decision makers. This is how it works.
Mhm.
So this is part of the successful jihad which they have against us, and I'm afraid that Israel had to give in because Gantz, as much as I heard, was invited to the United States in order to sign a commitment to do all kinds of things which the Palestinians demand.
Amazing. So, but there's a very interesting letter. Supposedly, it's true letter that Germanicus had written to Claudius, the Roman general. And he says that I've been all over the world, Germanicus says, and according to the peoples I've ruled, that's how I treated them. The French believe in some type of arrogance and so forth, so I gave an treatment arrogance. The Spanish, in terms of being passionate, we're passionate. When it comes to the Arabs, I learned that if you don't push them to the ground, they don't respect you. This was Germanicus, the Roman, wrote 2,000 years ago. 2,000 years later, nothing's changed. The Western world doesn't understand that. That, as you mentioned before, you have to have a strong hand. If you have a strong hand, then you have the temporary peace. If that's the case, then what can people in the West be taught until to realize that they're being eaten up by the Islamic Jihad? And as you mentioned before, jihad comes in many forms.
Yeah,
What?
look, I think the main message which Israel should broadcast is that we, Israel, we are the front bastion of the Western culture. If you guys don't support us and we fall, you are the next to be devoured by this devil which comes from the desert. And America will be the next one after Europe. The Atlantic is not wide enough to keep America safe from this wave of jihadism with all its kinds, which will flood Europe. It's already flooding Europe and will flood America as well. It can take 10 years, 20, 30, 100, who cares?
Will happen.
You know, in the Quran, there is a verse which says, Inna Allah ma'a sabirin, means Allah is with those who have patience. And they have a lot of patience.
Yes. I wrote a short story once saying that in that example, the short stories that what's happening in the future, 2030, something like that, 2035, and all the leaders of the world now are been
Well,
called.
there is a very important book which
Yes.
a friend of mine, Douglas Murray, wrote.
Uh-huh.
The title is The Strange Death of Europe.
Mm-hmm. Well, we
I
should.
highly recommend everybody who watches now, please put your hand on the book and read it.
I'll put that in the link. It's a very important book. But going back to the story of what I wrote was that's the year's 2030, and all the leaders now have been trained in BDS. They're all college students who are now the political leaders. And it's a reckoning where the UN has come together and decided to vote Israel out of existence. That's a possibility. That's a strong possibility if we don't stop it now. Now that here, when you yourself was one day was in the left and you were in the peace now and you changed your mentality and so forth, what was it that in your personal political growth that was the thing that you realize it's hopeless?
First of all, I became a leftist in 1982 when I saw how the first Lebanon war was conducted. Well, actually, it was not arranged. It was a private venture of two people, Ariel Sharon and Raful. Ariel Sharon was the Minister of Defense, and Rafael Eitan, Raful, was the Chief of Staff. They did not consult with Begin, the Prime Minister. They didn't even inform him about all kinds of things. And the way which they conducted the war actually cost the lives of Israelis because it was very sad those days. So I decided that these people should not be given anymore the steering wheel of the country. And I became a leftist. And when I left the army in 1995, I joined a peace organization named Netivot Shalom, Paths of Peace. And then when the Second Intifada started, or even before, when the terror attacks started in the 90s, I started doubting it because what did we make this Oslo agreements for if you guys don't take care of Hamas? What are you good for? And then I saw more and more evidence that Arafat never meant to give us peace. So I became right-wingish with all what I know and what I have.
Okay, because interesting you mentioned about Raful, and you mentioned also Arik Sharon. Raful came interesting, and also Sharon came from the left in the beginning because they were Pamachnikim, and then they two went. And Raful, I don't know if he changed political his stance, but Sharon did. When Sharon gave the idea of leaving Gaza and so forth, was it because he wanted to show a lesson that what will happen if you give the Arabs land, that they'll turn into a terrorist state?
No, he caused the leaving of Gush Katif and the other places in Gaza because of the investigations which were against him, against his children, and this is why because of the withdrawal from Gaza Strip and for 4 places in Samaria, the investigations actually stopped.
So there's diversion. There's a diversion. People always want to ask a question is this way. Should Israel, so to speak, take over the Temple Mount, Har Bayit? Should they get rid of the mosque and so forth? What will be repercussions if such a thing happen?
Don't forget, our belief says that we believe that God will, or let's say, the third temple will descend from heaven already, done, made, and it will replace whatever replaces it. It will come miraculously. This is what we believe in Judaism. This is why we are not supposed and we are not allowed, when it's not right to do anything to the Islamic mosques or domes, whatever, in the Temple Mount. We are not supposed to, because anyway we are not pure. We cannot return to the avodah, means to the
service,
as it was in the temple. So why going into this issue? Yet Jews should be, if Jews think that it is okay halachically to go on the Temple Mount, and there are Rabbanim who allow it. If you go around, not in the middle, all kinds of limits. So it's okay. So if somebody definitely can go, or even people who come to Israel, especially to go in their lives, and they can do it today. Again, and I'm not getting to the question whether it is okay according to the halacha or not. I'm not a posek, I'm not a rabbi. What I'm saying is that those who think that it is permissible, they have apparently the rabbanim who support it or allow it, while the others do not.
But my question of you is a political question. The question: if people were to do such a thing, what would be the implications? What would be the results in the Arab world? Would all the Arab world unite together? All the Islamic world around the world come together and march on Israel? Would that be because people think no, that's just a fantasy? No, they really will do that.
It all depends on what Israel broadcasts. If Israel broadcasts power, that nobody will be able to cross any fence to Israel, and whoever crosses will be shot dead, means disproportionality, it will work. If Israel shows weakness and actually fear from what you describe, it will come.
So basically, we have to live in a fortress society. We have to live
Yeah.
we have to be modern samurai.
Jabotinsky wrote a whole article about this under the title Kir HaBarzel, the iron wall
Mm-hmm.
which Israel should erect around it in order to keep all the others outside. Well, I'm not sure that this is the real thing to do, because don't forget that 17% of us are Muslims here in Israel. And some of them, apparently, as we saw in the recent weeks, are vile jihadists.
In one recent video you made, you in a conference I saw, that you said that one of the groups in Lod are the Bedouins, and the Bedouins that came into Lod many years ago they were brought into. If you could tell
Yeah.
the audience what really happened in Lod, why Lod fell apart.
It's not fall apart. It's the Arab population of Lod is comprised of actually four groups. One is the original people who lived in Lod for who knows when, and they mostly are Christians. Another group is people who were evacuated from two villages near Aza. One is named Majdal, and the other one is named Jora. And they were actually a passage for the jihadists of the Fida'iyun, as they were called in the 50s, from Gaza to Rishon LeZion, to Rehovot, in order to kill, in order to rob, in order to bring damages, altogether, all kinds of jihad against the farms in Rehovot, in Etziona, in Rishon LeZion. So at some point, Ben Gurion got sick of it, and he sent some army trucks to load them all on the trucks. One truck went to Ramle and Lod, and another one went to Gaza, means to the Gaza border, and showed them the way to Gaza. And then they stopped trafficking jihadists or uh, fidayun to Israel. Okay, today you cannot do these things because of the Supreme Court and because of human rights and all this BS which took over the whole world. Okay, so Israel has to fight all these phenomena with the given judicial tools. I'm not in this profession, so I don't have much to say about this, but this is what apparently will happen in the forthcoming future.
Two last questions. I know it's very late, and right now it's midnight in Israel. I want to thank you for that. Just two last questions. One is this way. Recently, it's been said that Egypt may take over Gaza. Is that true? And if it does, what will it do?
Well, don't hold your breath. Egypt will never, read my lips, never go back to Gaza, especially not to be the ruler in Gaza. They had such bitter life from Gaza in the 19 years which they were in Gaza, between 1967 and 19, no,
48.
between 48 and 67. 19 years. The Egyptians broke their teeth in Gaza. So to come back to Gaza, I am almost totally sure that they will never agree to this. And Sadat, don't forget, although he wanted to get the Sinai until the last centimeter, he did not want to take back uh, the Gaza, because you know what Gaza is. Gaza is a swamp of problems. Who with the right mind would want to be in Gaza? And I think that the government of Israel is right by not willing to go into Gaza, even in the price of leaving the Hamas, because as long as Hamas there are the rulers of Gaza, it gives us the reason why not to establish a Palestinian state. Because as Gaza was taken over by Hamas, the rest of the Palestinian state, whatever their borders are, will also be part of this phenomenon. So we
One
have
last
to.
question. One last question this way. In terms of from your own perspective in the history and so forth, what can we do to teach the Jewish youth, especially American Jewish youth, to understand that their identity is now being questioned, that they can no longer realize that they, with all the liberal mentality, they can't be any more considered American per se, and that they have to somehow understand that they're going through transformation and realize that their connection should be with their brethren in Israel.
Well, look, the good news is that the more time passes, the American Jewry becomes more and more American, deeply engraved into the American society, American economy, and American culture, and so forth. This is the good news. The bad news is that the more American Jews become American, it comes on the expense of being Jewish. And the chance of liberal Jews who became Americans, and Judaism for them is in the second grade, the chance that they have Jewish children is low, because their tendency to meet a non-Jew and to have a family with are bigger than the chance of meeting a Jew to have a family with. Means, and this actually what brings us to the Pew results of the survey, which they have every 5 years, which show very constantly that within non-religious, means Reform, conservative, maybe also, and unaffiliated Jews, mixed marriage is something like 70 something percent. God, this is a bad thing.
Yeah.
So this is I would say, to strengthen the Jewish education, it is vital, because if you don't strengthen, if you don't emphasize Jewish education in one way or another, the chance that a child who goes to public school and doesn't get private lessons in Judaism or group lessons about Judaism, the chance that he will meet and get married with a Jewish girl, or vice versa, a girl with a boy, Jewish boy, I think that these chances are very, very low.
So in a certain way, you could say it's a jihad against the Jewish nation too. They were being eaten up from within.
Look, you know, for the youngsters, the memory of the Shoah, the Holocaust, either it doesn't exist or faded with the years, because they are young. They won't, even their parents were not born in the time of the Holocaust. So what do you expect from their children? And this also, the more we distance from the Holocaust, the less are the people who remember it, because they pass away, or many of them pass away every year, month. And those who remain loyal to the nation and to the land are being viewed as racists and Nazis in sometimes, because they dare to talk about the people's rights. So the postmodernism will kill Israel and America after it has already killed Europe, no doubt.
I want to thank you so much for this wonderful hour. Thank you, everyone, for joining us and watching this amazing knowledge that we just learned from Dr. Kedar. We understand now more about the Arab mentality, the idea of jihad, the idea of Islamic Brotherhood, and why Islam is on its march always to have jihad in every form. We ourselves should protect ourselves by strengthening our identity. This week's parsha and this week's sedra is about Korach. Korach was about the person who tried to make an instigation and to have divided Jewish people. If we're divided, we can't stand so strong. We have to have a united front. And that should also be not only with our Jewish brothers, but also with the non-Jewish world, and stands Western values of that whereby Israel is the bastion of freedom and democracy for the whole world. And unfortunately, we have to use force because with thugs, with people who have mentality of conquering, there's only one language in the stand, and that is force. So thank you everyone for joining us.
Hallelujah.
And thank you, Dr. Kedar. Have a wonderful Shabbat.